ready to go in 15 seconds.
Excellent.
Looking for the truth, look into your eyes, and you'll see it's been there the whole time.
Good afternoon to you. This is Patricia Keane, and today I'm not presenting Health and Faith Matters. I am presenting the Trouble with Porn Conference. So you are very welcome to Radio Maria Ireland. I know we have many guests joining us from abroad, America, Canada, Scotland and England. You're all very welcome. And to those who are joining us on Serview, you're welcome. And also those on Facebook Live and YouTube. That is the Radio Maria Facebook and YouTube channels. So please feel free to let us know you're with us, and also we will give you the numbers in a moment just before we begin the conference. But the first thing I want to do is introduce our guests for this afternoon. So Bishop Fonsi Cullinan, you are there and you're joining us on Skype. You're very welcome to conference, and thank you for giving your time today.
Patricia. Yes, I'm here in my Diocese of Waterford and Lismore in a place called Glencumara House, which was a house of the Rosminian Order, and now it's Holy Family Mission. I'm bishop here for 8 years now, just a little bit more. Really thankful to Radio Maria for organizing this conference on a topic which is so vital. And of course, and to be broadcasting this conference on the great feast day of Our Lady of Fatima.
Yes, very, very, very beautiful. It wasn't by coincidence that was chosen, Bishop. So the great battle at the moment is for the family. And we are family, and we are here to protect the family, and also here to let the family know what they can do about pornography. So we have the most wonderful guests joining us. Father Alan Hoffa, you are there out in Pennsylvania. You're very welcome today.
So great to be with you from the United States. My name is Father Alan Hoffa. I'm a priest of the Diocese of Allentown in Pennsylvania. I've been ordained for almost 14 years. And I've had the blessing of being called to this wonderful ministry of helping in the work of education and prevention, also intervention and healing in regards to the issue of pornography through both on a national and I guess now international level through Integrity Restored, and also on our diocesan level through our diocesan commission, commissioned by our bishop called the Lumen Christi Commission, which addresses this issue head on.
Well, we are looking forward to the information that you're going to be sharing with us today from vast experience. I've had a few conversations with you over the phone, and you have always made my jaw drop with what you have been sharing. So we look forward to all of that later. Kilty Oberlin, Dr. Kilty Oberlin, you are no stranger to us on Radio Maria, nor to the listeners and the viewers, particularly on YouTube channel and Facebook. So, Kilty, what are you going to be talking about today?
I'm going to be talking about the signs of pornography. If your child is engaged in pornography, what signs you might look for to indicate that there's an issue that needs to be addressed, and about recovery from porn addiction, from porn consumption.
Thank you. Father Chris Hayden, you have been beside me here on many occasions because it is due to your wonderful book, A Better Vision, rolled out last year, that we did several programs on all sorts of topics relating to the fallout from the sexual revolution. So this has come as a result of that.
It has indeed, Patricia. Thank you. It's great to be back. So yeah, I've been looking forward to today, and just to getting a lot of different voices together and getting the message out that not only is pornography harmful, but we are not powerless in the face of it. There are things we can do, things we can say, there's action we can take. So may this be a first step of many. Well,
we are making history. It is the first conference on radio on pornography in Ireland, and in 2016 the then Taoiseach said we needed to have a conversation about porn. It never happened, but it is happening today. Okay, so Father Chris, I'm starting with you. First of all, before I start, I want to give the listeners, if you want to get in touch, it is 089 467 2000. The landline is 01 4123 456. and you can email at info@radiomaria.ie. So you're very welcome to let us know your thoughts. This is your conference. We are presenting it. It is your conference, the Listeners' Conference. So, Father Chris, I am starting with you. I'm kicking off with you. I asked you a little while ago to speak about the lies regarding pornography, and you kindly provided me with a long list. I have shortened them. They have been edited. We need 2 conferences. Anyway, the first part of our conference will be focused on exposing those lies, supported by pastoral and clinical experience, up-to-date facts, and the wisdom of church teachings. So, Father, the question goes to you. There is a widespread belief there is no great urgency in dealing with the porn issue, and we can continue to kick the can down the road, pretend it's not happening on our phones and in our homes, and leave this messy business to someone else. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think I'd like to think that widespread belief is becoming a little less widespread. Nevertheless, it's a good question. You know, can we afford to delay? Is there room for wait and see? And I don't think there is. And one of the things about pornography is that no matter where people find themselves along the cultural spectrum, you'll find very, very few people who are willing to say, well, look, pornography is just fine. There simply aren't any issues at all about it. It's just grand. It's neutral. Most people wouldn't subscribe to that, but we immediately transition then into the question of why. What's the issue? What is the issue with pornography? And that immediately leads us to another question. Well, if there's an issue with pornography, what is sex and sexuality about? What is our fundamental message? What is our worldview? What's our understanding of the human person? And what this means is that if we want to tackle pornography, we need to be clear, and we need to grow in our clarity. On what basis am I articulating concerns and objections? On what basis? And that basis needs to be an understanding of human sexuality. So I like to think in some ways it's almost an element of a silver lining around the dark cloud. The silver lining is we're being woken up to the fact that we need more and more to articulate our understanding of human sexuality, so that there's a link between sex and values, between sex and flourishing, which we don't find in pornography, quite obviously. And precisely because it's so widespread, so easily available, pornography forces us to decide, number one, is it good? Is it what we want for our children? If not, then why not? And if not, then what values are we going to communicate to them instead? So we get into the whole discourse around values as well.
Okay, thank you. Father Alan, is there an urgency for us to do something about this here?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things I remember back to seminary, they always said theology is all about both and not either or. And so it is the issue of, there are so many who are struggling with this issue now because of what we call the 5 A's when it regards pornography. It's anonymity, it's aggressive nature, it's affordability because it's practically free, it's addictive nature, and the list continues on. And so there are so many who are under this evil right now, so we need to address it immediately. But the prevention work is also there for young children when you consider that the average age of exposure is 8 to 9 years old. So the prevention is in educating people so that those young around them can be prevented from this evil, while at the same time, currently, lives are being destroyed at every age, especially marriages and relationships and a person's own integral connection with their sexuality, as Father just spoke about.
Bishop Fonsi, question for you. Do we as a church, family and society have a responsibility to raise our voices and express our concerns about this grave matter?
Absolutely. You know, sin and the prevention of sin is a duty that we have to prevent, you know, and to ward off sin, to protect ourselves against it. And there is a responsibility on every member of the church, from top to all the way, I won't say top to bottom, but all members of the church, to realize the evil that is in pornography, that it disrupts the loving plan of God for the individual and for the family. And therefore, this is an urgent problem, and it is becoming more so because basically, I would say, in my experience, the phone is becoming a tool for the distribution of porn in a way that magazines years ago, if you wanted to view this kind of stuff, you bought a magazine in a rather seedy shop. But now porn is readily available, of course, on TV screens as well, and on various channels and all that. But to see young people, from the ages of 10 up with a phone, and how often are boys especially viewing porn, and therefore it is destroying their spiritual lives as well as their physical existence and their family relationships and so on, and then onwards relationships with girls. So it is an urgent problem, and I'm really happy that Radio Maria is tackling it today.
Bishop, would you agree that there is a silence about pornography and an unwillingness to deal with it at different levels, family, church, home?
Yeah, I suppose there is. It's one of these things that we just hope will go away, but that's really burying one's head in the sand. That's not a responsible way to look at it, because it is doing damage, and we can see that. I see, for example, in my own experience of working with young people, there is an isolation among men, and I think to, shall we say, deal with that isolation, I would say quite a number of men get into porn as a way of to try to make a connection with others. But of course, it's a false connection. Porn is not your friend. It's like anything that becomes an addiction is not a friend. It is slowly destroying us.
Okay.
And Jesus is offering us a freedom through his powerful grace from this addiction. He has come to set us free. And that's what we want to offer people, the freedom of the love of Jesus, to look at the human body as the good thing that God has created.
Okay, thank you, Bishop, for that. Father Chris, does the church oppose porn because she's prudish and wants to impose her anti-sex doctrines upon us? Or is the Catholic Church alone in its view on pornography?
I wasn't expecting to be asked any easy questions today, but you know what? That's a pretty easy question to answer. And why don't I allow the National Women's Council to answer it for us? And for those who aren't aware, the National Women's Council, how would I put it? They're a fairly standard workaday group of feminist women who, they have their own beliefs and all, but to put it mildly, they wouldn't exactly be in lockstep with Catholic doctrine. But here's a quotation from them regarding pornography, and it's from written feedback they sent to the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment regarding proposals for pornography education in our schools. So here we are, the National Women's Council. I quote, "Pornography harms both girls and boys by influencing expectations, normalizing disrespectful sexual behavior, and promoting misogynistic and often abusive and violent models of sexual expectation." That's not the Catholic Church speaking. That is a considered moral concern. It's a concern of moral expression. I'll make that point. We'll come back to it, I'm sure, later. This is a moral issue, and we can't be doing hand-wringing over, well, we mustn't impose morality. That, from the National Women's Council, is a considered expression of moral concern, and it makes the point that the concern is not an exclusively religious or Catholic one. And I mean, I could give you other instances of purely secular outfits expressing grave concern at pornography, but I think that makes the point adequately for now.
Father Alan, you in your diocese have been doing an enormous amount of work in helping people that are addicted to pornography. You've also been in the schools and the university, you in particular. So how would you feel about this question that, you know, our obsessive concerns over porn is going to bring us back to a society of harsher judgments and repressive attitudes?
I don't think it's that at all. Actually, what we're fighting for is a culture that is free because of especially the high addictive nature of this. And one of the things through the work that we do at Integrity Restored, it is a balance between not only the moral theology and the teaching of the church, but our partnership with clinicians and the neuroscience and the psychological underpinnings of all of this that are so damaging to persons. And so the balance that we have in the speakers today is excellent because it is that actual balance across the board that is affecting people. So it's not about putting people in a place. It is actually about freeing them from something that is stopping them from the fullest expression and understanding of who they are. And a large part of that is us understanding the connections. People freely give themselves into being under this oppression of this evil, and then they wonder why there are issues in their marriage, why there are issues that we face. For instance, over here in the States, one of the biggest areas of concern that we hear from our southern border between the United States and Mexico is the issue of human trafficking. Well, one of the things that's fueling human trafficking so much is the porn industry, and people aren't making those connections. And so the more that we're able to, why we are so vigilant about this is not only going to bring resolution to just a moral sinful issue, it is also going to bring resolution to so many other issues that are plaguing humanity at this time. And so we want freedom for God's people, and we want them to be able to experience life in the way it should be experienced and not under this weight of this evil that a lot of times people don't truly realize. So it's good that we're here today.
Chris.
If I could just follow briefly on what Father Hoffa said there.
Yes.
It's important to be clear as well that the pastoral project here and the church's intervention, you know, far from being dragging us back to harsh judgments or repressive attitudes, it's premised on good news, on the good news that we're called to freedom and that freedom is possible. And I've heard people say, and I've seen, you ask any priest or counsellor who's accompanying people who struggle with pornography, when they get the scent of freedom, the joy can start coming back into their eyes, the light comes on again, and that's very, very far from harsh judgment or a repressive attitude. We're talking about offering people freedom here.
Father Alan, last week in a conversation with you, you were telling me, I was asking you about working in the Catholic University, and you had been speaking in there, and you shared with me how a young man came up to you, an 18-year-old, and said, Father, thank God, you're doing something about it. I'm having the most awful life. Can you just share a little bit about that contact with us to back up what we're saying here?
You know, when I started this work about 7 years ago, there was a reticence to even have those conversations, but now it's a growing and growing issue. And as these young men are growing into adulthood and they're realizing that they're not able to have quality relationships, that their dating life is difficult, that thinking about marriage and having integrated sexuality for that is so difficult, there's more and more who are looking for help. And as priests, also as confessors, we hear, there's a difference between a person who comes in and says, I viewed pornography once, versus the person who, I'm here again. This is a repetitive issue. And this young man that I spoke to, for instance, he just had the look of hope. Someone is actually here. Someone is bringing voice to this, and I can overcome the fear, and I can also overcome the secret. And that's one of the things when I refer to pornography, I call it the silent predator. And one of the parts of it being a silent predator is that it remains a secret in so many lives, and the devil preys upon that. And so, one of the things I say to people is the devil loses his power, and so does sin when it's no longer a secret. And so having a safe place for people to be able to bring this sin and to bring the struggles that have been plaguing them with this sin, then turns the corner of hope and healing for them. And so, this is, again, at every level, but especially for our young, there is, I think, an added level of shame, which is not of the Lord, but it's a shame that, again, the evil one uses to keep them in their place. And when they're able to break through that and see that the church is there in the loving presence of Jesus Christ to be able to help them, again, it turns that corner from shame and desolation to hope and consolation that the Lord and the church is there to be able to help them moving forward.
And here as well, we really can see, for those who maybe, for various reasons and perhaps some very understandable reasons, for those who've tended to forget that the church really is a mother with people's best interests at heart. There is no agenda behind this ministry, behind this outreach, other than to bring people freedom and joy. And also that's at the end of the ministry to those who are actually suffering and those who become burdened and perhaps addicted. And we also have a huge task of prevention and education. But there's nothing at issue there other than bringing joy to people and enabling people to maintain their joy in the sometimes difficult world in which we live. So it's an important point that the church here is mother and pastor, and we should perhaps try to bear that in mind.
Hilty, you have a doctorate in eating disorders. You've been in clinical practice for a long time. You're a counselling psychologist. There's a belief here that porn in itself is not harmful, and it's mistaken to blame porn as such. Share with the listener your experience at a clinical level that will debunk this belief.
I've enjoyed listening to. I almost forgot I had to speak today. But what I've been picking up, what's been especially what Father just said there about overcoming the secret and the fear and the shame. Today, what I'm seeing, so I work with eating disorders. So people have a distorted, a sense that their body shape is not good enough. They're conflicted about their sense of self. There's just depression, anxiety. That's what people are walking in the door usually with for me, because that's the shingle on my door. But when we unpack the eating issues and we go back to what the actual onset issues are, it's all around this conflict of, am I good enough? And when we start to see, and I start to see with people, this, I have so many anecdotes that actually feed into this about how, whether or not a person actually viewed porn themselves, or they know that their peers are viewing porns, immediately it puts that person into a sense that they are not good enough because they'll never measure up to the people that, the actors and actresses, or, the people that are on the media of what's being watched. Secondly, when there's this conflict that I see so many kids and adults struggling with, and that conflict that it's sort of like we know that porn's wrong, but at the same time, it's been normalized already. So kids are saying, it's okay. My boyfriend is watching porn, and I'm struggling because I don't know if I can keep up. Well, right there's two issues. That the person is really, what they're actually saying is, I'm not ready to embark in this intimate relationship, this physical relationship, but yet I don't have the permission to be okay to say no because there's going to be something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. And then secondly, the fact that it's been normalized and people are watching porn, their peers are, it says that it's okay, and I'm not allowed to think that it's not. There's another issue that I keep seeing coming up, and that's where kids, where I'm working with adults, when they're reflecting back to their childhood. Now, this is pre-pornography, pre-internet, where we have it's accessible on devices and everything. So their stories are coming back to maybe stumbling on their parents' stash, their mother, stash, their pornography. And what that did is it put a barrier between their relationship with their parents immediately. it put a barrier with a sense of their identity, their sense of, am I good enough? I can't measure up to this. Say the person stumbled on their fathers, and it's secretive. They feel betrayed because the mother has been, what does that mean about their mother? All of this sets up this idea of enabling that person to engage in healthy, dynamic relationships. There are barriers all over there. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm going to go to Father Alan because, again, in one of our conversations in preparation for this conference, I asked you a question, and it's regarding what is the response of young people when you go into the high schools to speak to them about watching pornography. And you asked them a couple of questions, and I think that should trigger the answer that I'm looking for. It's particularly addressed to young girls. Can you take it up from there, please?
Well, it falls right in line with what Kilt said, because, the body image and the accepting of another's use of pornography, and really, as she talked about, those moments of children with their parents, also the key word that we're talking about there is trauma. And that's a word that needs to be brought to the forefront with all of this, because people again, have these traumatic moments, and then they feel the need to, it causes things like repression. It causes them to act out in other ways that are harmful, and the list goes on. But the other piece of this, a T word, we talk about triggers, we talk about trauma, but it's also what we're doing here today. We're talking about truth. And when I get the opportunity to come to the young people, it's all about laying down truth for them and the reasons why what I'm saying is true. And it's always interesting as you go through and you talk about, what if a person who's using porn, what it means and what it doesn't. One of the things that I lay on for the girls, and while this is a men's and women's issue and it is growing in women, the majority are still the men. I say, ladies, if your boyfriend is watching porn, he's cheating on you. And to watch them stop and look around the room and look down and have a moment where they are, it sort of clicks for a moment, and they think to themselves, oh my gosh, I've enabled my boyfriend to cheat on me. I've told him that it was okay. If he did it with a physical person, I would break up with him. I would be angry with him, but I've given him this permission. I've, again, added to the normalization of this. And then you get the phone calls afterwards. They're going to see the guidance counselor, the chaplain, the campus minister. And then I'm getting the calls. Okay, how do we work through this? And we support also the folks at that level to be able to minister to these children, because now they have some tough decisions. And that's the other piece. It is that difference between the tough, just knowing I need to make a tough decision, and making the tough decision and working through the various facets of all of it. So, this is a large part of, we need to continue to bring the truth and show the harmful effect that is happening at so many different levels, so that it starts to really click in the minds of our young people, and they will make the decisions themselves, but we need to bring that truth to them so that they understand also the ripple effect of this, that it's not just about the here and now, but what it's going to do for them and their significant other and the relationships down the road.
Father Chris, you want to come in there?
It's one of the lies that can surround some of the conversation around pornography is that it's offensive or it's wrong because it's offensive. So if you don't find it offensive, it's not wrong. That we kind of reduce it to almost a feeling of whether or not we're offended. And as Father Allen has pointed out there, it causes objective harm. Pornography, it's morally corrosive, whether or not people happen to find it offensive. And sometimes when people are woken up to the corrosive aspect of it, then they may perhaps begin to find it offensive. But it harms the human capacity for self-giving love. If we go right back to first principles, pornography fundamentally is wrong because sex is ordered to self-giving and to a community of love our community of loving and of life. And pornography is about neither self-giving nor community, and that's why it's corrosive and why it's wrong. It's not wrong for some people because they happen to see it as offensive, or maybe they're prudes or something. It's wrong objectively in and of itself, because it cuts across who and what we are as relational human beings.
Bishop Fonsi, I'm coming back to you now. What do you say to the debate that adults are free to engage in whatever consensual activities they choose, and if we compromise this basic freedom, we're on a slippery slope? Is there substance to that belief, or is it based on a very defective understanding of freedom?
Yes, well, can I just say this is really a fascinating conversation and discussion. And one thing that's coming across to me, and it's very pertinent to your question, is the issue, what does it mean to be human? I think that the great question in our modern times is that, what is man? What is woman? What does it mean to be human? And we can see the great, the philosophy, shall we say, of the world today is, we can manipulate life, we can control life, we can choose our own gender, we can be whatever we want to be. And you see the resultant huge confusion and pain and disillusionment. It is a false understanding of freedom to think we can do whatever we want. There's a beautiful image of freedom for me, which always makes sense. And, I live beside a beautiful river, and the river flows between two banks, which keep the river in its proper place and the water fresh and pure and traveling out into the sea. But if I take away the banks, then the river just becomes a stagnant pond. There are guidelines for which the Lord has laid down for our human nature. And if we keep within those guidelines, we are strong and pure and true, and we flow in the right direction out into the sea, which is the loving arms of God. And to understand freedom as I can do whatever I want is in actual fact to enslave, because I am a sinner, and if I do whatever I feel like without regard to God or to my fellow men and women, then I become an isolated, selfish person, trapped within my own limitations and my own sinfulness.
Bishop, we have a question that has come in, and I would like to give it to you to answer. Is pornography an open door to demonic influences?
Well, it certainly could be. It certainly could be, yes. Because any sin which is freely given into, and if it begins to take over one's being, and of course then getting into these various sites, which I presume get darker and darker and darker, then one is heading into a very, very dark place, and we know who inhabits that dark place.
Father, you want to come in there?
If I could just add to that, Patricia.
Yes.
Here in our diocese, our diocesan exorcist and I, we are in contact on a regular basis.
Yes.
We have had multiple discussions, and there are common links that I've also experienced in this work when it comes to the issue of the demonic and the realities of how the Satan manipulates this sin.
Father Chris, you want to
thank you.
come in there?
Even if we don't use the language of demonic influences, and I'm certainly not saying that we shouldn't, but even if we don't, we know that pornography, it's inherent for so many people that it becomes a matter of increasing captivity, and certainly we would say as Christians that the evil one wants us to be captive. My only concern about going too quickly to the language of demonic influence is pornography has a huge social aspect as well. And if we focus, and I'm not saying that that language necessarily obliges us to focus on the individual aspect, but pornography is a societal thing as well. And the demonic can be at play, not just in the lives of individuals, but socially. There's one commentator who says, and it's a very sobering thing. He says, we become a pornographic people, even if we don't all gaze at the pictures. And I'll give you a quotation from after that. He says, this is because we accept the principle undergirding pornography, which is that the pursuit of sexual gratification is a good thing, maybe the greatest good of all, and trumps all other considerations, such as the health of marriages generally, the welfare and innocence of children, the promotion of virtue and the common good. Now, if you were trying to establish a kingdom opposite the kingdom of God, well, that would be a fairly good description to start with, I think.
Father,
may I add?
Yes,
may I add something?
please.
Just the anecdotal evidence that I have for people who work in the industry itself, the porn industry, is that there is a high drug use of those who make the movies, and that suicide rates are high. And again, I think the influence of the evil one is very common in that, and we should be praying, I think, for these people. I remember watching something on, it could have been Father Mike Schmitz, or saying, we should pray for porn stars, because these are people who are caught in a style of living which is detrimental to them and causing harm for others.
Thank you, Bishop.
Bishop, you're exactly right. When I speak with men's conferences especially, one of the things I'll bring up is that there's many times where those who are being viewed in the video are dead, and when that registers with people, it's very startling.
Yeah.
Well, Father Chris, you want to say something about consent, and so do you want to take an opportunity to?
Yeah,
say
the
that
whole
now?
thing of it's another one of these, and I know you wanted me particularly to speak around the lies of
Yes.
some of the discourse around pornography, and the whole thing of consent. We're talking. Look, lighten up here. We're talking about consenting adults, and if they want to harm themselves, even if it is harmful, on their heads be it. That's, I mean, in addition to flying in the face of Christian charity and good sense, there are deeper issues there. For instance, it's well established that most children who encounter pornography, their first encounter with it, they weren't looking for it. They stumbled on it. They were exposed to it. God bless their little minds. They had no clue what it was. And the reason that can happen is because we live in a society in which, underage children who, by definition, are legally incapable of consent to these things, that doesn't place a legal burden on internet platforms to make sure that the safety of children is guaranteed. And that's surely one of the more sinister concessions our culture makes to its notions of freedom and consent. It seems like, to put it in slightly dramatic terms, but I think accurate terms, it seems like childhood innocence is offered on the altar of sacrifice to adult freedom. It's a very strange notion of freedom and consent. Nobody has an absolute right to live in a society, because we're broken human beings. We can't live in a society where there's simply no temptation of any kind, and yet we have to do our best. We have to be taking whatever action we can to guarantee the health, the safety and the innocence of small children.
Thank you. Bishop Fancy, the first
Yes.
of the 7 safeguarding standards of the Catholic Church in Ireland is entitled Creating and Maintaining Safe Environments. Safety here is not just a question of protection from predatory paedophiles. It most certainly includes that, but how would you assure Catholic parents who are concerned for the moral and spiritual safety of their children, even in Catholic schools?
Yes. Well, I think to help parents, first of all, to conscientize them that this is going on, that they have been chosen by God to be the parents of the children whom God has given them. Therefore, they have a responsibility for these children and for their entire well-being, physically, morally, socially, spiritually. and that they have the grace from God to help their children in this whole area. Therefore, to instill in them about the beauty of the human body, male and female, God created them. To encourage them as well. I was talking to one particular mother who has 6 children, and she has this app on her phone, I think it's called Covenant Eyes, so that she knows what all of her children are viewing if she wishes to. And they know that, and they have this arrangement as a family. They have spoken about these things. They have prayed together. And I'm not talking about, extensive prayers, but even to pray, and extensive prayers, of course, are good, but even to pray every day, just a short prayer, that the Lord will protect us from any evil thoughts, from any outside influences, that we're praying the protection of God on us. And so something that has been very helpful in my own life, if I may say, Patricia, is in this whole area. It was a friend of mine was just describing how he walked into a hotel once. It was in a different country. He was on holidays. He walked into a room where there was a meal, a cold meal, left out for people who were obviously coming into the hotel. And he was tempted. He was quite peckish, and he said, would he take one of these plates? But he said, no, that would be stealing. But then on his way out of the hotel, he looked in at the private swimming pool, around which there were several young girls in bikinis. And he felt as if he would steal a look. But then the thought came to him, if I shouldn't steal the meal, why should I steal a look at these girls? They are not for me. God made them for someone else. And I think that notion of stealing a look at a beautiful woman or man on a screen, who are exposing themselves in a way which they shouldn't. They are offering themselves very stupidly, obviously, but to steal a look is to steal something from the integrity of that person created by God. And I think that could be a helpful way for people. Do not steal what is not yours, both material things, but also even to steal a look is to steal something precious given by God. Maybe that's a helpful way of dealing with this.
Okay. Father Chris, I want to ask you a little, to expound a little more on the safeguarding standards, please.
Yeah, you mentioned the first safeguarding standard there, I think. But I have the text of it here in front of me, and I think in the context it's worth reading. Mm-hmm. So there are 7 safeguarding standards at the Irish Church, and standard 1 is entitled Creating and Maintaining Safe Environments. Now, I think this is worth dwelling on because in my own experience, quite a few parents are asking, what can I do? And they're getting a little, concerned. And then with a view to, I know it's something we'll be looking at a little later on, but with a view to pornography education in schools and what's being planned and what may or may not be coming down the track. But let me just read Standard 1, Creating and Maintaining Safe Environments. Church bodies provide an environment for children that is welcoming, nurturing and safe. They provide access to good role models whom the children can trust and who respect, protect and enhance their spiritual, physical, emotional, intellectual and social development. End of quote. There's a burden on us being the church as such, I suppose primarily the patrons and boards of management, but the whole Catholic community, because these are Catholic schools. There's a burden on us to ensure that standard is being maintained in our schools. We can't look the other way when it comes, for instance, to sexuality education or pornography education. And if that burden of responsibility, even if people are concerned and they feel they have reason to be concerned, and it's not about creating a moral panic, but for instance, if you have a concern and you feel it's a reasonable concern regarding what we've traditionally in recent decades described as child safeguarding, not only would it be immoral of you not to pass it on, you could find yourself on a sticky wicket if you didn't pass it on. If you have concern for the moral, spiritual, psychological, developmental welfare of your child because pornography is in view in some way that you can't quite give chapter and verse on, but you should, I would say, pass that on as well. And even if that includes making a report to your diocesan safeguarding office, then I would say do so. And I would say equally that church authorities would fail terribly if we dismissed parental concerns and the concerns of many clinicians as groundless or purely anecdotal or whatever. So there's a very, very clear and growing onus on us there. We don't know everything, but we do know enough to oblige us to act. And we should we already have a lot of instruments like this safeguarding stuff. Like the comment I read earlier from the National Women's Council, we have enough hints coming out from the NCCA, from the Department of Education, to the effect that this ain't going to be pretty. We need to sit up and ask for, as I said, chapter and verse. And if we are not happy, if we think that children's welfare is compromised or risks being compromised, if we're acting in good faith, well, then we should act. I'm not talking about generating mischief. I'm talking about motivating people to speak up, to demand to see stuff, to read it, and to act as robustly as is called for.
Thank you. Father Alan, in speaking with you, you were sharing some statistics with me, and I just want to go to it briefly because we are asleep here in this country regarding the issues around pornography. So I know you have a couple of stats there, and I'm going back to the youngest age, to the children that are watching porn. So can you just give me the stats there of young children, and also from there I want you to go to how you are safeguarding children and what has become necessary in your Catholic schools safeguarding children because of these little ones watching pornography. So
I mentioned this earlier. The first and foremost piece is that the average age of first exposure to internet pornography is between 8 and 9 years old. 80% of 15 to 17-year-olds have had multiple exposures to pornography. The largest population of internet pornography users is 8 to 17 years old.
8 to 17.
89%, 12 to 17 years old, yes.
Okay.
89% of all solicitations of youth in chat rooms are sexual. 29% of 7 to 17-year-olds would freely give out their addresses online. And, you know, it's interesting when you look at that. One of the things we spoke about the other day is, I know here at least, there would be a lot of different things to draw attention to stranger danger for our young children. And that would be about, you know, people lurking at parks and you know, seedy individuals, you know, being around places where children are. And now it's a completely different landscape because it's happening on the internet. It's happening. And again, this is an anti-internet. This is an anti, you know, devices and things for children. It's about using them properly, making sure that there are parental safeguards in place, making sure that there are firewalls in place that vet out pornography, but also that parents understand what their children are doing. Here in the States, it is both state and federal law that pornography, there need to be firewalls in place for schools, that pornography cannot be viewed by children on school devices or on school networks. That's a standard. There's no question about that. And that's been for a while, since almost the availability and the high use of internet in schools.
While I have you speaking on stats there, I want to ask you about, again, you shared with me a couple of details regarding adult relationships and the amount of what figures do the applications for marriage annulment, church marriage annulment represent?
Yeah, this was on my mind earlier when there were a few conversations happening.
Yes.
This is a national reality as well as it proven in our own diocese.
Mhm.
Over 50% of marriages that come to the tribunal for annulment have at the foundation of the break in the bond pornography. Over 50%. And again, that's not just in one localized area. That's a national standard across all of our dioceses here in the United States, and I'm sure the same would be, it would be very close over in Ireland as well. Just again because of the pervasiveness of this, and it's turning relationships into these not relationships of love, but relationships of use. And that was something that I wrote down earlier, especially when we were talking about the young and my work with high school children. One of the things for students who have had me in the high schools, in the grade schools, one of the points when I really enjoy going and talking to them, this is up Father Chris's alley, about John Paul II's theology of the body. And we use that. There's a middle school application that we use with our students. And one of the things in teaching this to them is that contrast between love and use, and the fact that things like pornography, as well as what people can do when it comes to what we call generation sext, of students, young people sending images and videos of themselves to others. This is all using. Pornography uses. All of these things are using and objectifying, whereas you are called to experience love. And true love between you and other people in relationship, but also founded first between you and God, and also a pure love for yourself, not in a prideful way or in a self-using way, but in a way that is a true gratitude for the gift of your life and the beauty in which you've been created. And I found that distinction to be a very important filter for our young people, especially. But then it carries over because, again, what we're seeing now is especially young marriages that are disintegrating because of this issue. They grew up in a culture that started to normalize this reality that it's okay for porn. There was a couple who they came in for their marriage preparation classes, and God bless them, they were not cohabitating. They were living chastely. And truly, both of them were virgins, and they were going to, consummate their marriage, and they were looking forward to that. But on one of the inquiries that we did as part of their marriage preparation, they marked that they disagreed with the fact that pornography was harmful in a marriage. And so I looked at them and I said, "Can you explain this to me?" And they looked me dead in the eye, and they said, "Father, how else are we going to know how to have sex with each other?" And my heart was broken. I thought to myself, you think that you need to watch pornography to know how to have intimate sexual relations with your spouse, but they're not the only ones. There are so many today. And then what happens is that pornography morphs itself into a grave reality within marriages. And there's a few things that are going on. The first thing is that there is a rise of sexual abuse, sexual assault, and rape in marriages because of the men trying to reenact the things that they are seeing on these videos and on this online pornography. And the other thing too is that what you're seeing is that there, at least over here in the States, there's a rise of advertisements for medications for erectile dysfunction. And one of the reasons for that is pornography, because there are issues with the ability to be able to have arousal with a human person, with your spouse, because you can't do that because it happens by this inundation in how the brain chemistry is rearranged in someone's brain, in an inability to actually have that physical, intimate human embrace. Can't do it anymore. It can only happen through a screen. So it is a massive issue that has so many different tentacles that is just destroying. And in this conversation, in this part of what you asked about marriage, but it reaches out to every facet of society.
Thank you very much for that. Bishop Fonsi,
Yes.
I've got 5 minutes left, okay,
Yeah.
in the first part
Yeah.
of our programme, and then we have to depart. So I have a question here. What are your thoughts on the statement that sex education, including education in pornography, must be based on objective facts and not moral values? Is there any such thing as value-free education? Now, I need to go to Father Chris on with this question also, so I'll give you a couple of minutes here on this one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, there is, and this has been proposed by certain proponents of sex education in schools, that it must be all the facts, and there can be. We must not bring morals into it. There is no such thing as value-free education. We in the Catholic Church are trying to propose the beauty of the human body as created by God and for a purpose. That the human person is made for self-giving love. This wonderful phrase that Pope John Paul spoke again and again about, that man cannot understand himself unless he sees himself and herself as giving their human person to others in self-giving love. And the breadth of the vision of the human person is beautiful, and to give the authentic meaning of human sexuality to that person in school according to their age, according to their maturity, not to give the entire gamut of human sexuality to a young child, but what he or she can assimilate at that age, but also, of course, helping the parents and encouraging parents who are the primary educators of their children to give this message in a correct way according to their stage in life, the beauty and the breadth and the freedom which the grace of God is offering to us all.
Yeah. Okay, so Father Chris, I'm just coming to you for the remainder of this question, please.
Okay, on the whole thing of value-free sex education,
Yes,
well, there's no
exactly.
such thing. The NCCA website, if anyone wants to look it up, www.curriculumonline.ie, it asks the question, does RSE, Relationships and Sexuality Education, does it point out what's right and wrong? And it answers as follows: as with all education, RSE is not value-free. RSE deals not only with factual information, but with, wait for it, values, attitudes and behaviour too. But the same answer on the same NCCA website page goes on to say the teacher's aim is not to impose their own personal values or code of behaviour. So on the one hand, it's all education imparts values, and yet the teachers must not impose values that they subscribe to. And we're trying to square that circle. And there's a strong language, I suppose, forgive me, but there's a certain moral illiteracy. And I don't mean that people are amoral, but in terms of the ability to discuss what it means, there can't be such a thing as, like pornography teaches values. We would say anti-values, disvalues, but you can't unteach them without reference to other values, better values. And what I've been trying to say lately, insofar as I can, I would be saying to parents to adopt a stance of, if you are going to talk to my child about pornography, I want to see your script. I want to know what values you are promoting, what values you're working from, what understanding of the human person and human sexuality you're working from and promoting.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that, Professor Patricia Keane. You've just come in there in the last 30 seconds. You're very welcome. It's good that the viewers can see you. We're going to be working with you, talking to you, and discussing this in the next segment. So first of all, Bishop Fonzie, would you mind, before you leave us, would you mind giving us a blessing, please, and maybe sharing the St. Michael the Archangel prayer with us before we disconnect with you, and then I'll say goodbye to Father Alan.
Sure, thank you, and thanks to Radio Maria, and thanks to you, Patricia, and Father Alan, Father Chris, and all the speakers.
Mm-hmm.
That's
yes.
right, thank you.
Yes.
Well, on this feast day of Our Lady of Fatima, who spoke to the three young children to pray, to do penance, to make reparation, and to realize that she is the Queen of Peace. She is the Queen of Peace. And we pray for peace for all listening to this, and then that this program may help us to do what we can to promote the beauty of God's gift and of God's plan for humanity. And so I pray a blessing on all of you, through the powerful intercession of Mary, a blessing of God's peace, that you will know the personal love of God for you, and that he wants to use you powerfully to be his instrument of mercy, of peace, of truth, and of love in the world. And may that blessing come down upon you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, as we pray now for the intercession of St. Michael the Archangel. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in the hour of conflict. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God restrain him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, throw Satan down to hell, and with him all the wicked spirits who wander through the world for the ruin of souls. Amen. Our Lady of Fatima, pray for us.
Okay. Bishop, thank you so much for joining us. I know you have something else on at 3:00 in the Cathedral in Waterford, so we're going to let you go. And thank you for your commitment for today and for your input. It's much appreciated.
Thank you so much. It was great to be part of this. Thank you.
You're
God
very
bless.
welcome. Father Alan, thank you so much. You've gotten up very early this morning out there in Western Pennsylvania, and I know you have Holy Communions at 10:00, so you're scooting off as fast as you can also.
Yes, thank you so much, Patricia, for having me. And I look forward to the continuing conversation. You know, one of the things we spoke about earlier was the struggle for children, and the conversation. It's so important to have a gradual conversation with our young people about their development, and especially so that leaves an open door to talk when this issue comes up. So I pray, God, we're able to continue the conversation as well.
I hope so. I think there'll be plenty of opportunity for it. There's been huge interest in the topic today. Father Alan, thank you so much for your input. It's much appreciated, and lovely to have you on Irish Radio with us. It won't be the first time. Okay, Father Chris, you are staying with me for the next part of the show. Professor Casey, thank you so much for coming in. Now, before we go to you, we are going to a piece of music, and that's just going to allow us change, okay? Pop out to the loo and come back. And so I've chosen this piece of music today, and it's called Perfectly Loved, and it sums up the most wonderful love that God the Father has for us. And the artist is Rachel Lampa. And thank you there, Tom, inside, who's working so hard today. Thanks a million.
Who said that you weren't beautiful and that you didn't belong in your own skin? Who said that you were all alone and that you're never gonna find love again? So many little words, so many little lies that have followed you all of your life. Looking for the truth, look into your eyes, and you'll see it's been there the whole time. Ooh, even when you were running, even when you were hiding, never been a moment that you were not perfectly Every single moment you've always been perfectly loved. Ooh, perfectly loved. You've always been perfectly
In the hands of the infinite, as the wounds of the world became his. See the kindness heaven has for you, and now he's always been drawing you in.
so many open doors,
So many open doors,
so many miracles,
so many that have followed you all of your life.
looking for the truth,
Looking for the truth,
look into your eyes,
oh,
and you'll see it's been there the whole time. Ooh, even when you were running, even when you were hiding, never been a moment that you were not perfectly loved. When you barely believed it, when your eyes couldn't see it, every single moment you've always been perfectly loved. Ooh, perfectly loved. You're not a problem.
you're not a mistake.
Don't need fixing or solving.
In the arms of his grace,
You're perfectly human, made from the dust. You've got a heart broken and scarred, yet perfectly loved. Oh, even when you were running, even when you were hiding, never been a moment that you were not perfectly loved. When you barely believed it, when your eyes couldn't see it, every single moment you've always been perfectly loved. Perfectly loved. You've always been perfectly loved. Ooh, perfectly loved. You'll always be perfectly loved.
You're welcome back to, I was going to say Health and Faith Matters. I'm programmed to say Health and Faith Matters. You are welcome back to our conference on the trouble with porn today. It's the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima. So we are going to our second guest. Kilty has departed for a little while, but she'll be back with us for her section in about 20 past the hour, 20 past 2. Okay, Professor Casey, you have been in psychiatry for many, many years.
Yes, I have. I'm not as old as I look, though.
You started young, as they say. So we've been very excited having you on, because you are you have huge experience dealing in all types of psychiatric issues, and this is more or less a modern one.
This is a very modern one. It's so modern that most psychiatrists would have had very little experience of dealing with people who were using pornography on a very frequent basis. For me, it's only happened in the last 2 or 3 years that I've been referred to people in that situation. And the reason that it's so new is what the pornographers say. Pornography was always with us, and we know it was. If you go down to Pompeii or Heraclium, you'll see the images on the wall. They sell them even in vases, to bring home as gifts to your family. Look at all the paintings of pornography. So it's always been around. But the difference now is that the pornography is active. It's not static. It wasn't just pictures. And even when both of you were teenagers and may have been tempted to watch porn, you'd go to the top shelves in the bookshops, and it was just pictures of nude ladies or semi-nude ladies and men. But the modern porn is active. You see people doing things, in the process of doing things, in the process of having intercourse, and doing much worse than that. And that's the problem. That is so much more addictive than is just pictorial porn. And that's why internet porn has grown so rapidly, because it's readily accessible, it's freely available, and it can be done in private. You don't have to go into a shop and embarrass yourself. You don't have to spend any money on the magazine like buying Playboy. So it's readily available. It's free, and then you can do it in your own sitting room or your own back garden if you so choose.
When patients come to you, obviously, do you deal with child psychiatry, or is it all
adult psychiatry?
Adult psychiatry. So, what type of symptoms do they present? What are the issues with them when they come to you? What has it done to the human being, to the mind, to the soul?
Now, I have to say, I don't see many of them. They don't come anywhere near psychiatrists, because most people who use porn don't believe it's any harm, don't believe that it damages them or damages relationships. It's usually, so I would see them in the context maybe of wanting to annul their marriage, wanting a civil annulment because they have always been watching porn, and their spouse will say, if I had known my husband was always watching porn in the past, I would not have married him. That's not the kind of man I want. So
is this the grounds for civil annulment?
It may be if the person who if the spouse wasn't aware of it before marriage, because they didn't give fully informed consent. So supposing I was married to somebody who was a porn viewer, which I am not, thank God, but supposing I was, I could claim, well, my husband never told me about the porn. I knew nothing about it. I would not want my husband to be using porn because it would damage our relationship. I would not have wanted that. So that's a potential issue in civil annulments. It's also I also come across it in the context of children who are now adults who have been abused, and they will tell you that the people who abused them would have watched porn with them, and they would have been made to watch porn. So that's the context now in which I see porn mainly. I have a few patients who have who came for treatment, and some of them present with depression and will only admit when they get to know you very well and you're treating them for what seems like a standard depressive illness. Only then will they say, well, I need to tell you something. And then they tell you what has been going on for them.
I'm just wondering, Patricia, is it that whole secrecy thing that came up earlier, but is it possible that there's a significant time lag between where psychiatry is now as a discipline and where pornography has gone? Is there a lot of catching up to be done?
Absolutely. In fact, when I was thinking about this over the last few days and preparing for today, I was thinking, my goodness, we really should be asking every patient that we see when we take the history. We ask them all, do you smoke? Do you cigarettes? Do you vape? Do you take drink much alcohol, etc.?
Yes.
We should, I think, be asking them, do you watch porn?
I think so.
Because they may well, they're almost certainly a coterie of my patients who have never told me that they are watching porn and getting kicks from porn. So I think that is something, and I will certainly start doing it in my in my practice from now on, because I wasn't aware of it until I started reading the extent of the porn and the prevalence of porn addiction. I mean, I came across a figure that about 10% of people in the US will admit to being addicted to porn. That's a huge number. That's higher than the percentage who have depressive illness at any one time. So if that figure is accurate, that's a lot of people.
Did you get a chance or an opportunity to listen to Father Alan Hoffa when he was on for the first hour?
I didn't know.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say this anyway, so it's a point of reference at this stage that each of these podcasts, the segments, will all be up tonight on Radio Maria. So it would be very well worthwhile if you have the time, and I would strongly suggest that you listen to him, because he's been working with families, working in the schools, the universities for the last 7 years. He really is an expert on this topic, very impressive speaker. But he, he's talking about and very open about the destruction that's happening in marriages. That he said that over 50% of applications for church annulments are based on pornography.
Yes.
That's a massive statistic.
Yes, yes.
And then, so we want to look into we know that, we know how addictive gambling is and alcohol is, and our levels of our tolerance keeps increasing. But with pornography, the level of tolerances goes to higher violence. And that's a huge problem where women are being damaged through violent pornography. And they step up to that grade very quickly. So when we look at, we want to discuss what does it do to the brain? Where are the neural pathways developed? How and where does this addiction pathway take place?
Well, there are basic drives that every human being has: the drive for companionship, the drive to be part of for social networks, and the sexual drive. The sexual drive is present in everybody, and it's hardwired into the brain. There are certain parts of the brain that respond to sexual stimuli, and that respond to attractive women, and that facilitate intercourse, and that are associated with the three phases of sexual activity, which is desire, then the activity itself, and then orgasm. So they exist in every human being who is healthy, unless they have physical illnesses or something. And with pornography, the desire phase becomes much more prominent, because desire for anything results in the release of a substance called dopamine.
Yes.
But with pornography, and particularly with modern pornography, before I come to that, with dopamine, you get, when a person is thinking about chocolate, or thinking about the nice piece of cake that I have here in front of me, my dopamine is spiking as I'm looking at that. So you get a spike of dopamine when you're looking at something that you desire. And then the spike will dip very quickly. And if you have too much of it, you get bored, okay? And you don't want any more. Like if you eat chocolate or anything you like, you get bored after a while, and you don't want any more of it. But what happens with porn is, when people are watching porn, and they're watching whatever it is they're watching, they get bored with it pretty quickly. And in the past, when they had a magazine, they just put away the magazine and hide it under their bed from their mother. But now what they do is, at the click of a button, they can go to another website that maybe is a grade up in terms of what the pornography is displaying. So having started maybe with watching videos of a heterosexual couple having intercourse, they can click to homosexual intercourse, or bestiality, or whatever the next step up is, so as to get the rush of adrenaline, because the rush of adrenaline is a good feeling. And so what happens is, you get lots and lots of dopamine, and people will seek out that, and that's why they escalate so quickly, because they want to ward off the withdrawal that you get when your dopamine levels are diminishing after all this excitement. And so people click from one to the next.
So as a non-scientist, as a layman to this, it sounds to me like it's a chemical addiction, but the chemicals are already on board.
The chemicals are already on board, because they're part and parcel of everybody's life. We already have the chemicals, but with pornography,
they're in the brain.
They're in the brain, and they're being released into the brain. Now, so they exist in everybody, and we get these spikes all the time. But with pornography, because people are able to click to another site and get something more to keep the spike going, and that's the danger. Now, the other thing that dopamine does, it releases a thing called delta phos-B, and delta phos-B is an ingredient that's concerned with what's called neuroplasticity. Now, neuroplasticity means that the cells in the brain and the nerves in the brain can grow and grow and replicate themselves. Now, that's why if people have, say, a brain injury and they're young people, they can make a fairly good recovery often, because the brain is neuroplastic. It stretches, they regrow, and delta phos-B facilitates that. But in the case of pornography, the growth and the changes in the brain structure are concerned with the sexual circuitry. That's hardwired.
Just the sexual secretary, because that's what the person is watching.
Yes, that's right.
So for the addict, right, where does this end? The brain continues to make more dopamine. What grade of pornography can you end up watching and still not be satisfied?
Well, you're absolutely right. People go on to all kinds, to humiliating pornography, to violent pornography involving women. Goodness knows where it will end in the future. I mean, this is all a very new science. The studies are very new, very young. And for a variety of reasons in the studies, some of them are not very good because they don't have control groups. They just take a group of addicts and see what happens to them. They don't look at how people who are not addicted behave. So this is all a new area of research. I suppose conceivably it might end up with snuff movies or one obvious thing.
What do you mean, snuff movies?
Snuff movies, they were talked about quite where people are given drugs and killed online for pleasure. And they were talked about quite a bit in relation to child abuse and using children for these snuff movies back about 10 years ago. But I think we may be into that kind of terrible scenario. But pretty bad things happen in the porn sites. I don't watch porn. I never have watched porn. I have no inclination to. I think it's so degrading. But for people who do, there are all kinds of things out there that none of us can really comprehend.
People who are listening to this conference, and many will be learning about pornography and the extent of it for the first time, because in our first part we dealt with how secretive porn is and that there's a great unwillingness to talk about it. So one of the things that I noticed, that when the posters were shared online for this, and people that I would have shared them with, that I would have expected a response from, there was silence. They didn't want to know, which sort of in a way surprised me. So just going back to, so the people are going to be hearing language for the first time, and like snuff movie is certainly a new word for me. So what I wanted to ask you about that was, when it comes to the conscience, right, it's the mind, is that part of our mind, which is our conscience, that tells us, okay, this is wrong? Has that just been eliminated at this stage?
Some people actually feel badly about what they do, but they can't stop. Some people with porn addiction, or with any addiction, they feel bad about what they do, but they can't stop because the hardwiring in the brain has changed. So there is some spark of moral sense of the moral wrongness of it there in some porn addicts. The problem is, though, that we now live in a society that seems to think it's okay. I mean, they were talking about including it as part of the curriculum in the course for students. Yes. I have no difficulty with students being told about pornography, provided they are told about the negatives rather than it being presented as something empowering, because that is what the promoters of pornography say, that it empowers people. They can, practice their sexuality and act out their fantasies as they wish, and that's a very, very dangerous thing. We've even had, football stars praising the value of pornography, how it can contribute to a marriage. I think that person must only be looking at the old-fashioned Playboy type pornography, not what's out there in the world. The porn industry is a big industry, and it's moved from magazines to whole organisations spending millions and millions.
Billions. I saw it. It's worth 300 billion a year.
That's right.
Yeah.
I
Father,
heard,
you want to
I
come
heard
in
a
here?
parent say, very recently a parent said to me, porn is, we don't go looking for porn. Porn is looking for us.
Yes.
That's the technology.
Yes.
And that's his parents' fear for his kids, They don't have to go looking for it. It's predatory, and that's the term that was used earlier in the conversation. I am struck, Patricia, listening to you say that on the one hand, the aspects of science are in their infancy, and I suppose the whole maybe neuroimaging stuff and trying to and control groups and how do you set it up, because and also the secrecy and the shame that's there in the background as well. So that kind of impedes. It puts a brake to some extent on research and statistics and so on. But But listening to you as well, it seems clear enough that from a clinical point of view, this is deadly.
It is. And one of the things that happens is that people who regularly watch porn have completely unrealistic expectations of relationships. And that's where you mentioned, Patricia, about, the grounds for annulment.
Yes.
Because it can ruin marriages. The partner that you have is no longer good enough, even though she is willing to be there, or he, whichever, is willing to be there, and to be sexually active with you. It's not good enough for the person who is watching pornography, because they want more and more excitement from it, and so they will go to other partners very often. That's a thing called the Coolidge effect.
The Coolidge effect. What is that?
The Coolidge effect.
You're teaching us something here today. You're going to have to come in more often.
That's what I'm here for, I hope. The Coolidge effect is called after President Calvin Coolidge, who was a president of the US, and apparently he was he always looked as though he was dead. And when he did die, somebody commented, how can you tell the difference? But he was, and in his photographs, he actually looked fairly inanimate, but he had a voracious sexual appetite, reportedly. And there is a story that he went with his wife shortly after he was elected president to a hen farm somewhere in the US. And his wife went to look first at the hens, and he was doing something else with them. And she saw a rooster having sex with all the hens, and said, and she asked the guide, is this just a few hens, or how often does it happen? And he said, it happens all the time, hundreds of hens. And she said, tell that to Mr. Coolidge. Mr. Coolidge then came down and looked at the hens and the rooster, and said, how often does it happen? And with how many hens? And he said multiple hens, and he said, tell that to Mrs. Coolidge. So it became known as the Coolidge effect, and it's a term that's used in research to capture this idea that even when a person has a partner, a spouse that they love, who is available for sex and willing to have it, and willing to have more sex even, that their spouse, their partner, will choose somebody else.
Father Chris, this is all your language. The human being. It's all part of. What does behaviour like this do to the human being?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm fascinated listening to Patricia, because obviously I'm not a clinician, but from the pastoral point of view and from the church's anthropology, which is a humanistic anthropology, it's not an exclusive little doctrinal Catholic corner somewhere on a dusty bookshelf. The fundamental understanding of what human sexuality is for, it's for self-giving and with a view to communion, with a view to living a life in which others are loved and they're subjects of one's own, in one's own world, a shared life, not just objects, and so on. There is a myth, and it was coming to my mind a moment ago as you spoke, Patricia, that says that married life is liable to lessen someone's interest in porn because now they have, quote unquote, the real thing. Which that language even continues the objectivizing character, but it's not so, because porn is not about sexual satisfaction as such. It's about moving towards ever greater satisfaction all the time. It's clickbait. Keep clicking, go into the next site, whatever, more intensity. So the idea that, again, quote unquote, the real thing, actual sex, will cure somebody of a steadfast pornography habit is simply false, because it's premised on the understanding that pornography is about the pursuit of sexual satisfaction. It's not that has nothing to do with it, but more so it's a rush for novelty. It's a process. It's an ongoing, and far from helping couples in their relationship, pornography just creates unrealistic expectations. 20 years ago, prominent US and entirely secular feminist Naomi Wolf put it. This is 2003. She said, "Today, real naked women are just bad porn." Fairly crude expression, but that's coming from it. And the logic of it, I think, is again? Real today, and I quote Naomi Wolf, 2003, "Today, real naked women are just bad porn." As Kilty was saying earlier, the fear of just not measuring up. I can't be like that. I don't look like that. I haven't got that body. So who am I? I'm just a really, really bad instance of humanity here. And if somebody already has body image problems and they're looking at that stuff, wow.
And it's interesting, there have been a few studies on the sort of attitudes of people, men who use porn and use hardcore porn regularly. And they show that they tend to be much more misogynistic, have much more misogynistic attitudes to women than men who don't. They're also much more narcissistic. And so I think it goes along with what you were saying, that it's about the objectification of women. It's not really about sexual pleasure and closeness. It's about
What can I say to someone who says chicken and egg? They're using porn because they're narcissistic and because they're misogynistic. What could I say to that?
Well, that needs to be tested. That's possibly the case, but it certainly is, and that's one of the problems with some of this research, that it's so new. You need long-term studies, and you need to start studying people before, say, at student level. If you can do longitudinal studies, there's, I think, one such study going on at the moment in the US of 6,000 students aged 10 and over, and tracking them through to see what happens them in terms of porn and their porn viewing and the effect it will have on their personalities. So we need more studies like that. But you're right. That is a question. Is it a cause or an effect?
Father Chris, what does it do to the human being? A wife, she or a woman, she discovers that her partner is watching porn. It's been a secret. She doesn't know. She accidentally comes across it. I understand from what Father Alan has said that because they're dealing with all of this in his diocese and the parishes, that there is huge trauma for that person. So take it from there that though amongst people, wives, husbands, when they discover their partners watching porn, they have to be talking about it to the priests in Ireland. They've got to be there. There's some insight at a pastoral level of what's going on for them and how the church can help them.
Okay, that's I suppose a big cluster of issues there, Patricia, really. Yes. But we go back to certain objective realities, and sometimes when we're talking about a vision of humanity, an understanding of human sexuality and anthropology and so forth, because we're not in the realm of mathematics or hard science, it all can sound a little woolly. But we present an understanding of the human person, including in their human sexuality. What does it mean to be a sexual being? What's our sexuality for? It's for relationship. Relationship is fundamentally about self-giving. Self-giving requires self-restraint. And we start to import a whole lot of categories that, how would I put it, wouldn't exactly be flavour of the month. To be a sexual being requires that one strive to be a person of self-restraint, not just getting everything that comes my way, but steadfastly refusing not to take everything that comes my way. So pornography, it just uncouples sex from meaning.
Okay.
And it says the only meaning in the sexual act is what's going on there and then. And this, by the way, is coming down the tracks so hard and so fast behind the scenes for our educational experience here. It has arrived, but it just hasn't quite gotten off the train yet, to extend the metaphor a little bit. We're reading in various documents and research papers, and I can't give you again chapter and verse, but there is a research paper commissioned by the NCCA, the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, that's critical of any approach to sexuality that doesn't see it as being about personal fulfillment in the moment. That if we go further than that, we enter the territory of what is fear-based, and we're moralizing. And really, it's not hard, I think, for most people to figure out how destructive that can be. And again, one of the things that really can hobble the whole discussion, how can we have, in terms of education is a public phenomenon. We can't have, if we're to teach things in a systematic way, as in within an educational system and in a programmed way, we need a shared statement of what it is to be a human being, what human sexuality is, what human flourishing looks like. But we're so far from that we are still in a territory where parents need to police. Parents need to be very, very on top of what their children are being presented with, because we're very far from, and I'm not optimistic, one remains hopeful in principle, but I wouldn't be optimistic that we're within an ass's roar of a shared vision of the human personality that will enable us to craft a realistic and usable approach to pornography. We're very, very far from that. And that's why parents need to be constantly monitoring and need the help of clinicians, of pastors, of psychologists, and perhaps Patricia.
Yeah, I agree completely. And it's even more worrying now, when people can't even define what a woman is.
Meltdown.
If you can't define what a woman is and what the components of womanhood is, or manhood, as the case may be, you can't have discussions such as meaning within relationships at all.
When you were speaking earlier, the one thing that I felt the whole time is that this is the disappearance of the woman, right? So let's say, and it can be either way, that a woman is watching pornography and her husband is there, or partner. And it is that human being, the human side of that person, the emotional life of that person, their feelings disappear. They are no longer matter. And if we go from there with adults and we start working down through the next generation and the next generation, it is to me that feeling that the human being, the beautiful creature, is going to disappear. That it is just commercial.
Yes, I mean that's a very valid point. That the trans movement is annihilating women. Certainly, porn does. Porn addiction is something like 10 times more common in men than women. So it's a male phenomenon, male problem largely, and it's women usually who are at the receiving end, because they're the ones who are the porn stars and who are being paid to participate in these movies.
I'm asking you as a mother, okay, I'm parking the clinician just in this question, but as a woman, as a mother, who would you prefer to speak to your children about pornography and to teach them?
I would much prefer parents to do it. than teachers, because you don't know what the teachers are going to say. So I would much rather parents to teach all of these kind of intimate area in relation to all of these intimate areas. The question, or the issue, is that a lot of parents don't have a clue and would be petrified of dealing with this. And I think what you said earlier, Patricia, that when some people didn't respond to this whom you thought would to the notification,
Yeah.
and I think that's because people are too frightened of it and maybe don't know exactly what's going on in the world out there. So people need to know what they're talking about if they are to teach their children.
Go ahead, Father.
I'm just, Patricia, you had an article in the Irish Independent in 2020, and the title of it was "Parents Need to Stop Being Coy About Sex Education for the Good of Their Children." Okay, there's coyness as in just common regard and embarrassment and reluctance, but there's also a coyness around, if we're, look, the statistics we hear suggest to us that a lot of people who are opposed to porn have also looked at porn. That's pretty much inevitable if we just look at the plain statistical facts. That may be there somewhat in the establishment. It may be there among the church, among teachers, among clergy. But there's an element in which, the title of your article there, we all perhaps need to get over ourselves. We all need to say, look, it's time to step up to the plate here and not be scrupling and fretting and waiting for some Messiah-like perfect group of people to come along who have total moral authority. Nobody outside of God has total moral authority in anything, but we need to muster our courage and muster as much good common sense and human wisdom as we can and just go for it. And I think people are waiting to be empowered. That secrecy thing takes hold of a lot of people, perhaps including parents, perhaps including clergy, perhaps including our leaders, Lord knows. But we need to take our courage in both hands and say, this is what we believe, this is what we want taught, and we need to go do.
Well, I'm a great believer in being very honest and open about these things, because that was what I was brought up with. I was very fortunate that my mother was a woman before her time in some respects, and when I was brought up knowing where babies came from, and how they got there, that was told to me very gently and gradually over time. So I was brought up knowing that. I knew about gay people since I was a tiny tot, because there were one or two people locally who were gay. So there was no issue about that for my mother. So she didn't need to select a day and a time to sit down and have that chat with me. There never was that chat. And I tried to do the same with my children when they were little. When they'd ask a question, I would answer it as openly and honestly as I could in age-appropriate language, and always give it a moral context. I mean, I think you have to give this a moral context as well when you're speaking to them, and so well, people do this, but of course this isn't right, or people do that and that isn't right, or that is right and that's good, and all of that. So I think that we should. It sounds terrible, but I think we should be talking to our children about all of this at a young age, but in a very age-appropriate way and done in a very secure and loving setting. And as I say, age appropriateness is the key phrase here, I think.
The fear is that when this is being taught in the schools, that it's a teacher that's going to be giving these lessons. But what about if somebody if their agenda is other than, okay, we're just going to teach them and be very respectful about it. The fear for me is that there's an agenda behind it, and that it's not about protecting the child, it's about introducing the children to it.
Yeah, that's a very genuine worry, and it's one that I would certainly share if I had children of school-going age now. I think there are concerns that there's a wider agenda out there in government.
Yes.
And that many teachers will have the similar agenda. And as you say, the idea is to provide. It's not to provide information to help the child. It's almost grooming. In a certain respects, grooming if there is probably the word if they're very young children like 10 or 11, but you know, it's certainly to do with ideology and an attempt to change cultural attitudes to these very traditional values that have existed in all countries for years. For hundreds of years.
Yeah, I mean, these ideas, the ideologies and so forth, they have a history, they have a genealogy. You can trace back, if you do the reading, you do the spade work, you can trace back, you can go into the late, mid-20th century, you can go back further. They haven't just appeared. So it's not paranoid, it's not conspiratorial to speak of something in preparation and something gradually growing and gathering and being promoted. I mean, that's just verifiable. It takes a lot of hard reading and study to do it. It's not everyone's bag, so to speak, but there's no question that somebody hasn't just picked this up off the street. Of course it's being promoted and quite systematically.
Yes.
And at the heart of it, and you go back to you need only go back a generation to some French and American writing, a very deliberate plan to dissolve binary sexuality. Mm-hmm. It's all over literature. You don't have to, it's not speculation.
Back in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, there were active campaigns to decriminalise paedophilia. In France, Simone de Beauvoir and. There's some other famous person, Foucault, signed a letter and a petition to get the government to remove all criminal sanctions against people who had sex with children. It failed, but even back then there was an active campaign.
I mean, as recently as just up to prior to 2017, Roman Polanski, convicted paedophile, was a Hollywood hero.
Yes.
They took the Me Too campaign to stand that on its head. And then they were at pains to prove how righteous and virtuous they were. But yeah, I mean, these things have a genealogy. There's a history you can follow. You can follow it through if you have the time and the interest.
I have a last question for both of you on this. To me, as a clinician and being out there and having a radio program every week and, you know, being very open about conversations that we've had here, I see similarity between the silence of child sex abuse and pornography. Mm-hmm. That it is, I'm breathing the same awful silence.
You're absolutely right. It's a very good analogy, in fact. The silence around child abuse broke, 1990s. Yes. Hopefully the same will happen with pornography, but it won't take that long because it is very, very damaging. And I didn't get a chance to say it, but the people who actually watch pornography themselves are damaged physically. They get depression, they get premature ejaculation, or more commonly erectile dysfunction. Yes. It's one of the most common causes of erectile dysfunction now. So it damages. It's a lose-lose ideology and lose-lose behaviour.
Father Chris.
You know, again, it's something listening to Patricia and hearing the clinical side of things. It just shows to me, coming more from the humanistic side of things, that our church's teaching is so, it reflects what our human nature actually is. It's not, and I would say, take heart, Catholics and others. This is not some dusty little bit of doctrine that we parade out when there's need. We're proclaiming an understanding of the human version that corresponds to reality, that corresponds to the facts, and that therefore when we try to live it and when we pursue it, it conduces to human flourishing and to human happiness. Good to bear that in mind. And we have the science, we have the facts on our side. And so when we hear people talking about, well, you know, we have to be fact-based rather than ethos-based and so forth, call it for the nonsense it is.
Last word to you, Professor. You have 1 minute. What would you say to parents at this point regarding pornography? Those just 3 or 4 lines about what do you need to say to parents?
What parents should do is they should familiarise themselves with it. There's a very good video I think it's called Porn on the Brain. It's a YouTube clip by a woman called Louise Perry. And Louise Perry has written, she's a feminist, but she has written recently about how the sexual revolution has ruined sexual relationships has been bad for women and not very good for men either. So if you want to get a potted version of what you need to know about pornography, watch and listen to Louise Perry's YouTube clips.
Very good. Thank you so much for all of that. Thank you for giving up your time.
Pleasure.
And coming in to share your expertise with us. I hope you will be back.
Thank you.
Because
I'd love to be.
this is the first open conversation about pornography that's happening in Ireland, and it's a great pleasure having you being part of it, and I hope it continues. There's a number of people that want it to continue. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very wonderful.
Thank you,
having
Father Chris.
Thank you, Patricia. Thanks very much.
Now, so Patricia, we are switching back to Kilty, okay?
Yes.
So, and while we're doing that, we just have a short piece of music, and it is Liam Lorton, and it's Heal Us, Lord.
Stumbling and falling, your truth dawning. Heal us, Lord. In a yearning, searching, discerning, wisdom learning, heal us, Lord. Heal us, Lord. Heal us, Lord. Heal us, Lord. May your word renew us. May your touch restore us. Heal us, Lord. In division, hate and derision, blinded vision, heal us, Lord. In hearts broken, harsh words are spoken, empty tokens, heal us, Lord. Heal us, Lord. Heal us, Lord. Heal us, Lord.
You're very welcome back to our conference today, The Trouble with Porn. So that was Liam Lorton with that beautiful prayer, Heal Us, Lord. Kilty, you're very welcome back. Dr. Kilty Oberlin, counselling psychologist, specialist in eating disorders and lecturer and author. This girl has got a lot going on.
That was a
back.
wonderful conversation with Professor Casey.
Wonderful.
It
yeah.
was beautiful. Yeah,
Wonderful.
well
Thank
said.
you very much. Kilty, there's a question here for you. What role does pornography play in the mental health issues such as depression and anxiety?
Pornography will aggravate depression and anxiety because when people engage with porn, as I mentioned before, there's a conflict. We're not walking around saying, hey, I'm watching porn. I mean, to some extent, I'm hearing younger kids doing that, but still there's a censor and they don't share that with everybody. So there's an element where people know that there's something wrong, especially if people are engaging in porn underage, they are consenting. There's always that, are you of legal age, 18 or older? And there's a consent. So immediately there's a lie in saying that. And we know when we're lying. There is this sense of, whether people care. My point in all of this is that it establishes conflict within a self, and people end up pulling back. Now, when somebody's use of pornography increases to the point that this is where we keep talking about, this is where it's a problem, right? Where somebody can't stop. It's like, oh, I'll just stop, and they find themselves trying and not able to. A sense of isolation begins to ensue. When that begins, there's an increased anxiety, there's increased depression. We can find that there's more lying to hide going on. So once that lying starts, there needs to be, once we lie, we're again in conflict. Then there's more shame. So I heard chicken and egg being talked about before. Again, there's chicken and egg here. In order to persist and continue with pornography, or to engage in this behavior, we end up doing things that we don't want to do. And then, so that increases. Professor Casey was talking about, the thing about pornography is it impacts the brain. It changes the brain. And once we start dopamine, so with dopamine, as she was beginning to explain, we're getting these heights of dopamine bursts.
Highs.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're called highs.
And that's what that's what people are drawn to. But there's a threshold, and then people need more and more and more. So there's more isolation, more lying, more withdrawal. If somebody confronts a person, meaning, saying, it seems that you're struggling with this, people can respond with a lot of anger and aggression, or more lying, denial. So there's a chicken and egg in this. It will always lead to an increase of anxiety and depressive symptoms, mood disorders in that regard.
Okay, we've got a couple of messages here that I'm just going to run through while we're getting your thoughts together, Kilty. Let me see. This is from Siobhan. Excellent conference. It's so informative and very necessary. The following book also throws much light on this difficult issue. It is not an easy read, but explains well the correlation between the most heinous crimes and pornography. May our beautiful Jesus shelter us in his most precious wounds. And this book is called, it's called, Siobhan, you just might send that to me there, because I think it's Soft Porn Plays Hardball. Okay. So I have a copy if you would like to borrow it. Okay, thank you very much for that, Siobhan. Soft Porn Plays Hardball. Okay, there's a couple of other comments here, but these are for the Bishop, and I will read them out because they will have to be addressed. Excellent conference. Why has the Church been reluctant to support parents on this and related issues? I ask this as President of Catholic Secondary Schools Parents Association. We have fed into the various NCCA consultations but have received very little support from church organisations, and that is from Alan Whelan. Alan, we will bring those questions to the Bishop, and also hopefully we will have him back maybe on Health and Faith Matters to answer your questions. And also, can Bishop Fonsie explore further the questions of safeguarding in Catholic schools? Have bishops and trustees not got a responsibility? We will look after those, as I said. We will, when Bishop Fonsie does want to reply to these, we'll certainly, we'll work with Father Raymond on this, and maybe he can come back on catechesis. Do you want to say something, Father?
I would say maybe to repeat something I said earlier, that if parents feel, and it's not a case of starting a sort of moral panic or whipping people up, but if parents feel that they have enough of a concern, that they're really unsure that what's happening in their child's school, their child's Catholic school, that they're unsure that all of it is conducive to the well-being and the sexual development of their spiritual and moral well-being of their kid, they may well have a perfectly good reason to contact their diocesan safeguarding office. I know I mightn't be flavour of the month for making that suggestion, because it's not about being willing to push the nuclear button very early on, but the parallel that I would use is that if we have a concern that we don't have to be able to demonstrate is, if we have a reasonable concern in the general area of safeguarding, we pass it on. We contact the people in charge of safeguarding and we express it to them, and they can't but take it seriously. That's how it works. And in parallel, if it's in the area of pornography, or what children are being taught about pornography and sexuality in our schools, if there's a concern there, the onus is not to demonstrate with mathematical precision and certainty that the concern is valid. If there's a reasonable concern, then you pass it on. You make a report, and I would encourage, again, not to whip people up, but I think we need to be pushing this. We need to be leaning on this. We can't just be playing a waiting game and saying, well, on the one hand, hopefully it'll be all right, but on the other hand, we don't really know enough yet to get. We don't want to be awkward. We don't want to be drawing attention to ourselves. Sorry, but let's draw as much attention to ourselves and anybody else as is needed to ensure that these things are done in the best possible way for the sake of innocent kids.
If people want further information on some of this, particularly regarding pornography in children, hop on to the website Integrity Restored. There's vast amounts of education there, and please start looking at it. If you're a grandparent or a mother or a cousin or an aunt or a godparent and you're listening to this programme, recommend your relatives to go to the podcasts on Radio Maria and listen to each segment of this and share them. Don't be afraid to share them, because remember, this is family we're talking about. These are the little ones, and it's their future. So this is the reason why this conference is on. We just want you to hear the truth. Colty, turning over to you. There are facts that relate to the signs that your child is watching pornography. Could you take us down through them, please? And we'll just let you run through them.
7 signs that your child is watching porn. And I just, even before I start that, I really truly hope that this opens people up, that so many people think it's not an issue. This is an issue. I just want to state that, and it's in so many, it impacts people in so many different ways. There's no way that it's not impacting any of us right now. So, but when we're looking for our child, whether or not our child is watching porn, some of the signs that we see: a sudden changing in activities or switching off a device when we're walking in.
Okay.
So that quick switching off.
Yes.
And I was going to say we all do it, but we're always, we're aware of, we may turn a device off or be happening to turn a device off when someone walks in. But when we start to see that happening over and over again, we need to address it. And asking, what's up? Mind if I see it too? Just trying to aim for that transparency. When we start recognizing that the browsing history is deleted over and over again,
and it's important to constantly check that browser history, not both, as a one-off. Yes, check it,
and that we're constantly doing that. So checking, and if it's always deleted, ask what's going on. Again, looking at what's, as you were saying, looking at what is on the browser history, and if you see anything that has any sexual names or sexual content, it's time to address him or her. And this is now going into more the personality changes, where we mentioned earlier withdrawal. So we're seeing personality changes, one of which a bit more, the child is withdrawing more, isolating a bit more. If you think about it, they need to be isolated in order to consume pornographic materials, to watch it. So when we start noticing that, we talked earlier, the first question was about anxiety and depression. So if we start to see more anxious behavior, more depressive behavior, acting out, and difficulty sleeping. The brain stimulated constantly actually does impact sleeping patterns, as well as emotional issues impact sleep.
What about school grades?
Inability to study, to concentrate, will impact school grades. Inability, as well as that, social behaviors, interaction with other children. We're seeing this in pornography, but also in a lot of internet usage. So Snapchats, where kids are interacting on their devices more than, even sitting amongst each other, they're actually interacting on their devices more than each other, than with each other. So we're also seeing a little that going on right now too with kids. But watching, if kids are finding it more and more, if they're not wanting to go to hang out with friends, not wanting to compete or participate in activities that they used to find enjoyment in, because that's the other psychological sign, is where all of that dopamine is getting hypersensitized towards the pornographic images or pornographic material, and they can't get the same type of experience, enjoyment out of things that they used to. Or new engagements. So that's another thing to be watching out for. Let me move on because I'm aware of time. He or she isolating more frequently. If you notice, I always say this to moms and dads. You know your kids. If you sense that they're lying, if you sense that they're not being completely truthful, they're covering something up, it's time to have a talk. And to help with that communication.
Hildy, when I was speaking with Father Alan last week and working out the program, he was sharing that. So he's got all of this experience over 7 years, and he was sharing that when children watch pornography, it is traumatic for them, and trauma always leads to regression. And we were talking about that off air. That trauma leads to regression, and the regression is the latter things that you've been talking about. And this regression, regression leads to suppression, and with suppression, this comes up much later in life.
Yeah.
So it's all linking into your 7 signs. And this is where. Are there more?
Well, just a few. Increased time spent online, which is kind of a given. I sort of talked about that before. And I also said this, when confronted or when you try to have the conversation, they're overreacting. Their denial is sort of overreacted. You'll see some explosions and whatnot. It's not a reason to back down. It's a reason to continue.
And that overreaction is, do you not trust me?
Yes.
Right. And anger.
Yeah.
Right. Or why can't I be left to watch this alone?
Yeah. Okay. Because there's a real fear that this is going to be taken away from them.
Yes, sure. It's going to be taken away from them.
and that's where if it's their only sense of enjoyment, there's there's a desperation as well as an acute sense of shame and guilt.
Yes. Okay. Do you have more points?
That's it for now.
Okay, all right. Kulti, what we didn't get to here is how recovery is possible.
How recovery is possible. The thing about pornography, and this is actually, it's interesting because it's also linked with food and pornography, internet addiction. They're called process addictions. The recovery is so it needs to be a process, and that's the way we need to start thinking about recovery. We can very easily say with porn addiction, just stop. But obviously, it's one of the issues is people find it so difficult to stop. Once people stop, there's this massive sense of this craving emerges, and you'll see dramatic mood swings. You can even see physical reactions because it's so intense.
Yes.
And so, and you see this with food addiction as well. So people can nonchalantly say it's, just eat normally.
But it isn't
not
like
that
it.
simple.
It needs to
Yeah.
be.
So, and it's the same thing with this. So at first you'll see these tremendous cravings.
Yes.
But when the next stage is where we actually need to trust that the brain will heal, and that's what we're doing in that first stage.
But
need
that's
to
going
give
to be long-term,
space.
Detachment,
Especially
from watching
when
porn.
the child is young. And this is the danger with children, is that the brain is not fully developed. And that time that's being spent devoted to consuming pornographic material, that the dopamine highs are only coming from that highly sensitized sexual material. All of the other parts of the brain, the ability to socialize, the ability to
engage in conversations.
That's a skill set, and develop all the other skill sets with regards to even learning how to say no to myself and manage time. All of these very important skills are not getting developed. And then the brain needs to heal, and that part of the brain is still stalled.
Okay.
But we still need to trust that given enough time, that can actually, we can begin that healing process. But we will, as I'm hearing Father Hoffa was saying, we still need the child, or adult who is in recovery, they still will need to build those social skills, those communication skills.
Rebuild them.
Or build them for the first time if this is happening as an adult and they have a decade or two of social with isolation and whatnot.
Colty, we have our next guest waiting to come in, Gerald O'Donnell, who he's a father of a young family, and he is here to ask questions, the questions that the listeners probably won't have thought about, but he's been listening to the conference in the building for the past couple of hours. So we are going to take our leave of you again, but you will be back.
This is musical chairs for me.
This is musical chairs for you today. You're turfed out. You're invited back in. It's not personal.
No, I understand that.
So if we get Gerald to start moving in, we're not going to go to that piece of music Tom is out there. So we're just going to go straight to Gerald. So Kilty, thank you. Yeah, you go ahead there. Thank you very much for joining us and for your huge contribution to us today. It's been absolutely enormous and wonderful. Thank you so much. And we will have you back on Health and Faith Matters. Thank you. Jared, good afternoon to you. You don't have to put the headset on you because you just need to get into the mic. The headset is just in relation to speaking. So how are you doing? You've been waiting a long time to get in here.
Great, and I could stay out there a lot longer. It's flown by, really, really enjoyable.
Has it? Really?
I
have you learnt a lot of information?
I have. It's a very, very interesting topic, and it's actually very, how would you say, current for myself. My oldest now is turning 11 in July, so we've 6 children, 10 years down to 10 months. But we've just been discussing this, myself and Maura, my wife. We have to start addressing this. You cannot keep your head in the sand on this. Just like Father Chris said earlier, one parent said to him, "This comes looking for you." I've seen it. I was on the internet.
Are other parents? Are you having the conversation with other young parents about this?
In general, but not really about the porn. There's a little bit of a reluctance there, but just since I've been doing some research on this in the last couple of months, it's like saying it's time now to start talking. This is just time to start talking.
Get over yourselves.
Oh yeah, and straight up, and I don't even mean speaking among Catholic parents. I'm talking about on the sideline of the GEA pitch.
Yeah,
that's where I was thinking of it. Like we're all standing around looking at 6-year-olds, and not putting a tooth in it. Straight out, bang! This is happening. It's going to come into your family, and it's like what another parent said to me. You might think your son won't look at it. Well, your friend's son will look at it, and then your son will look at it. It is going to happen. There is no avoiding it. Even as an adult, like I was last night, I was looking at LinkedIn, and a porn image came up, but it was a fella. You wouldn't expect it, like a work. It wasn't an ad or anything like where it normally comes up. you're saying like what people put up on it, like, you know, this is on LinkedIn, like, you know, so it wasn't TikTok or Snapchat.
And Jared, the other issue about which we can't reach to on that because we have a time limitation today, is the legal side of this. For example, a mother contacted me some time back when we first discussed it on Health and Faith Matters last year, and she just told me about an incident that something it was nonchalant, that her child shared an image of an underage girl. This child was an adult over 18, and the police were on the doorstep over that. The Gardaí was on the doorstep because an image of an underage child had been shared. There's a whole legal side of this that parents also have their eyes closed to.
Yes, and I suppose something like that can happen inadvertently, but it's the whole thing with the porn industry is that it's like one expert in it described it that it's a paedophilic drift, that, for example, they brought in a law in America where you couldn't use underage, but they're using actors to say that will be 18 but will look 14. And one of the top searches now for porn, it's always like for youth or for teen girls, or it's younger. And like this is where it really brings in, like, people go on about ethical porn and in this country, well, we'll teach ethical porn and all like this.
Is there such a thing as ethical porn, Father?
No. No, because it's fundamentally disruptive of sound living and human flourishing. So no, there isn't.
Go ahead, Jared.
And it's even like, I mean, what's ethical, like, being about bringing in, like, you know, children into the whole porn thing? Okay, technically they're not children, but they look like children. Like, it's money. It's money, and it's sick, like, you know, and there's no point in calling it anything else. I mean, something that jumps out at me is the secrecy. That's what is really, and like anything that's secret, you know, you should really have a heightened alert to, and it's in this program over the last 2 years, or 2 hours, that's what's come out. Something I was looking at, and say if I was thinking of buying something technical, and it came up earlier about covenant eyes, the bishop raised it, that you can see what your children are seeing. There are other ones out there as well, like Canopy, and that's a real-time filter, because you can get these filters or blockers, say that if your child types in Playboy or whatever, I don't think that's going to be quite so effective, because your 9-year-old, what we've been describing is that they don't go looking for the porn. The porn will come in as an ad or whatever like this, and there's something you can click and now they're in. It's there. So if you have something like this one, Canopy, it's only one of them, as in CANOPY, it's a real-time filter. So it filters pictures, video, and prevents any sexting or anything. And it's real-time, so it doesn't slow up you don't even know it's actually working in the background. So whatever you're searching for, but it'll filter all that material out. So it's active. So it's stopping the porn just popping up as a matter of course.
How expensive is it? Is it something that you buy and you subscribe every year, or is it just
yes,
once?
It is, but you can get 30 days free. I was just looking at it, so
okay.
And then you get 15% off if you use a code. So look, when you've got a month there to make up your decision, if you can't afford it or whatever, that's a decision you can make after that. But at least you can see how effective it is then as well.
Okay, Jared, sorry, Father, you want to come in there?
Well, just on a more general point, I would just love to ask Jared a question. What does the church need to do for you and Maura, for Catholic parents? What help do you expect?
I would think it would be very beneficial if in each diocese there were evenings about this. So invite parents. I think it'd be great if it was actually. If there was at your Sunday Mass, you actually got preached about. the only time we were chatting about this in our family a year and a half ago, and we were saying we never really hear priests preaching on the whole sexual area. And my brother, who was living in Gorey 15 years ago, said, I remember Father Hayden, the same Father Hayden preaching.
He's way ahead of his standard, man.
But it was fantastic, like, you know what I mean? Like that, you know, these are real life issues, like, you know, there's nothing more real life. We're all married, we've all children, we are going through these difficulties in your marriage. Like, it's real life, you know. Speak about these things. The gospel is full of it. So you've got authority here to speak on this. And it was like, I remember a doctor's wife said to me, well, what would priests know about the whole sexual area? And like, they're not married. And I said, sir, has your husband, has he ever had cancer? And then the husband was there and he starts to smile. So it's the same thing, like, you don't have to, you know, so it's, I mean, priests are hearing about this all the time, the same thing, in confession, out of it, so they're very, very up to date with it, like, you know.
Father, what do you think that could be done at, you've been listening to Father Alan, all of what they have put in place in their diocese, and it is for their retreats, recovery retreats for couples that have, each one has discovered they're watching pornography. There is all the safeguarding has been put into schools, and they're adding more because now they see an increase of sexual abuse between young children. Young children that watch pornography, they have discovered that they want to touch and feel, they want to experience. This is happening, so they're moving to the next step of putting in of dividing up urinals in toilets where young boys just can't touch each other, or young girls the same. So what do people need to address at the moment, and what can they do and say regarding the church?
It's not much over 20 years ago since the church here in Ireland began to really leave no stone unturned to ensure that children were safe from physical abuse, from predatory paedophiles, basically. And the church's commitment to children's safety, even the church's detractors, have to admit that, you know, it's been effective. God forbid it should ever prove otherwise, but, you know, the response was massive, it was impressive, it was effective. No stone was left unturned, and money no object. And that's the way it should have been. How could it be any other way? Thank God it was done. But the question for us now is how to ensure, given what we now know, and given what's coming down the tracks in terms of clarity of information and the presence of a significant threat to children, and, you know, given that, what are we doing to ensure in our schools and in our parishes the emotional, psychological, developmental, moral, spiritual safety, well-being of our children? And I think there's a whole new area waiting suddenly to burgeon, and it must. But we need to be, again, to use some of the language of Father Casey in that piece in the newspaper I quoted earlier, we need to be getting over our coyness, we need to be getting over ourselves, we need to be upskilling, we need to be resourcing ourselves. We're not inventing the wheel here. We're not starting from scratch. We have the wonderful work that's being done in Father Hoffa's diocese of Allentown
Yes,
in Pennsylvania. There are resources there. We can piggyback on the great work of others and develop it for our own context and so on. And we will have parents. We'll have the likes of the Geralds and the Moores, and I'm not trying to put a job on them, they're busy with their kids, but we will have support, we will have people buying into this, because this is hands-on, this is very directly about children today. But we need to be organising ourselves and just drop any sort of wait and see thing. This is here and it's happening. You know,
in the issues of child sex abuse, it was the child's voice that wasn't heard. Now, that's not too long ago when the child's voice wasn't heard. But this time around, it's the adult's voice that has not been heard. And we're coming back to that same silencing of voice. And it's been done in a really insidious way, how we're not going to listen to it. We're going to pretend that it's not happening, but it is happening. And there are far-reaching consequences of this down along the line. When you have someone that I would refer to as an expert in, Father Alan, dealing with this, when he's talking about about young children of 8 and 9 and 10 years of age touching and feeling each other. That's sexual abuse. Okay. There's also, when we were dealing with, and when we were chatting to Patricia Casey, she's saying, right, that's trauma. Right. So we know that trauma leads to regression. And then any regression will always appear years later. It may, for most of the victims of sexual abuse, it is years later when they say, yes, I was sexually abused. So I can see a real problem for educators and the church down the road if they don't start listening to the voice of parents. What do you say to that, John?
Certainly, and I'd concur with what Father said here, that I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. In business terms, you've R&D, and I remember one business advisor saying that means rob and duplicate. Now, in this terms, like, you don't have to rob Father Hoffa's. He'll gladly, I would say, give it, share it. He wants
most
this.
Definitely.
So you know what? Take his expertise. He's 7 years in this area. Bring it right over to the Diocese of Ferns and everywhere else, Waterford, Lismore, the whole lot. Roll it out. Tweak it a little bit for the Irish audience, etc. But you know, get people involved in this. There are Catholic parents, normal parents out there, hungry for this. I mean, there are parents that wouldn't necessarily, Catholic in name, wouldn't be going to Mass, etc. But they're having massive problems with their children with computers. And what I mean, and it's time we stopped calling it a phone. No, your child has a computer in their hand with a phone app. That's all it is. It's no longer a phone. A phone is what we all grew up with. And I mean, my daughter and son are saying, when can we get our phone? I says, when you're leaving this house. When you're 18 or 19, you're not getting one before then. I've seen it at close quarters. I've seen friends. They are not phones. You know, and only recently we were up the country and we were visiting friends, and there was an 11-year-old party on. But even the language of the girls, so we just said, no, this is a nice family, so we said, right, let our oldest go along. But the girls were speaking to each other in internet talk, like they were saying, who's your bitch? They were saying to each other, and you're saying, what? And my daughter came back after, that's a dog, like, and I was saying, no. I said afterwards, more and myself were having a cup of tea that night, and I said, that's real TikTok, Snapchat, talk. These were nice girls.
11 years of age.
Yes, 11 years, from respectable families. Like, you know, I don't like. Sorry now about using language, but you understand what I'm saying. Like, it wasn't pornographic, but it was terrible talk from 11-year-olds. You know, totally inappropriate.
Paddy. We have 5 minutes.
I think you know the lies of pornography and so much of it feeds off and it depends on other lies, background lies. Lies depend on lies, and lies give rise to other lies. For instance, the lie that very young children are mentally or emotionally equipped to ponder sexual matters and to ponder, you know, deep adult matters. Like young children, they're not protected by adult information, they're protected by adults. The idea that we'll give them loads and loads and loads of sexual information, they'll be sexually safe. Baloney, it's utter nonsense. It needs to be called out. They're protected not by adult information, but by adults. They're developmentally incapable of giving consent to sex. And in principle, Irish law recognises that by stating it there's, age of 17 to engage consensually in a sexual act. But you know, we're up against it. And I know it's people line up to talk about to poo-poo and it's conspiracy theory and all of that. But the WHO, World Health Organization, Standards for Sexuality Education in Europe, 2016, 7-year-old document. It peddles the lie because it states that between the ages of 9 and 12, a skill that should be imparted to children is that they be able to make, and I quote, a conscious decision to have sexual experiences or not. So Irish law is saying 17. The WHO is hinting at, it's more than hinting, it's saying 9 to 12.
Is that an attempt to take autonomy away from the parents, that children become the property
definitely.
Of the
and
state?
It's all over. You can explore that kind of literature. All you need is an internet connection, and that literature is your world. And you know, we would do well, I think, to ask people in charge, our politicians, our educators. Ask them, where do you stand? Where do you stand in this? Do you stand with Irish civil law that sets 17 as a bare minimum? What do you think of the idea of ages 9 and 12? Well, did you know that this is what the WHO is proposing, and have you anything to say about it to your elected representatives and so on? My broader point there is that the lies of pornography, they depend on broader cultural lies. And we need to try and grow in wisdom to the culture we're inhabiting, and our faith is our ally in that, because our faith gives us a vision of the human person and an understanding of human sexuality that actually ticks the boxes when it comes to the hard facts of human existence.
Father, I just want to come to a couple of questions, but I do want to make one point, and this is hugely important. The Hate Speech Act is currently within the Senate. Okay. If this goes through, okay, we have an opportunity to make our voices heard with priests and bishops right now. In promoting this, many young priests got in touch with me to say, Patricia, we need the bishops to listen to this. That was their experience. If this goes through, if this bill goes through, what follows that? Are our voices silenced around, is the law going to protect the educators? So do we not have are we prevented from our voices being heard? We have an opportunity here, Father.
Yeah, we're probably, I can't see how the hate speech thing would prevent us from raising concerns about pornography, but sexuality more generally. I mean, if I have this,
but what about the people teaching it? That's the problem.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, if I have the steadfast belief that, for instance, marriage is intended to be between a man and a woman, and I have the nerve to proclaim that post-hate speech, that could get very, very tricky very quickly. And if I have a desire to have my children hear that in the classroom and hear it as something normal and normative, then I could be falling foul of that kind of legislation very, very quickly indeed, and we should be concerned about that.
We are coming up to the hour. Father Eamon is coming on next, but I just want to wrap this up by saying, Ger, thank you so much for coming in. Father, this conference wouldn't be happening without you, so huge thanks to you. It's been working with you on your book, A Better Vision, that has led to all of this, so praise and thank the Lord for that. Kilty, thanks a million, you're still listening, and to Patricia Casey. And Tom, there on sound, thanks a million to Father Alan and the Bishop Fancy for their time and expertise. 1,000 thanks. And to Radio Maria for giving me the opportunity to present this. Thank you. So God bless you all. And you can listen to the podcasts on Radio Maria. Go into the podcast section. And I will talk to you next week on Health and Faith Matters. God bless you all.